Hi guys, welcome to lesson 3 of writing tense. I want you to have a look at this in focus task and read along with me. So I'm going to introduce you to a couple of new characters today. Over here we have Jacob, and over here on my right we have Layla. So Jacob says, I used 3 counters to show 1.2. Layla says, I used 12 counters to show 1.2. Now, as you can see, there's this big old pile of different counters. We've got pink counters that represent 1 whole, and then we've got these lilac-y counters that represent 0.1, which we also know means 1/10. Now, my first question is, who was the quickest to make 1.2 out of counters? What do you think? Any ideas? I'm hoping that you are able to recognise that Jacob was in fact the quickest person to make 1.2 out of counters. We know this because he only used 3 counters. So have a look at question 1 and let's see what Jacob did. He selected 1 of the 1 whole counters and then 2 of the tenths counters. We can see that he has collected 1 whole and 2 tenths. We then read this as 1.2. because we are obviously working with decimals at the moment. Now, where do you think on this number line that 1.2 should be placed? Is it smaller or larger than 1 whole? How much larger or smaller? Let's start with this first question. Where should 1.2 be placed? Any ideas? Well, we know that we've already got 1 whole, so of course it's going to be larger than 1 whole, so it's going to have to be somewhere along this side of the number line. Now, we've also been told that we've got 2 tenths. How am I going to count along on my number line? Let's see. So you can see here that the number line has been divided into ones. So we can see that we've got 1 whole and then we've got 1 jump, and that would give us 1.1 because we'd have 1 whole and 1/10. And if we do another jump, that would give us 1 whole and 2 tenths that we would read as 1.2. Now, Layla, on the other hand, we were told at the beginning in the in focus question that she used 12 counters to create the number 1.2. Now, you can see here that she actually used 12 of the 10th counters. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, how is that going to make 1.2, Miss Saulo? I want you to have a look here. Now, first and foremost, this is kind of looking and hoping a bit more familiar from when we were doing the unit on place value at the beginning of the year. So we know that Layla has got 12 counters of tenths. So she has got 12 tenths. So if I was to write that as a fraction, that would be 12 tenths, as you can see here. Now, thinking back of our fractions unit, how many tenths would therefore make a whole? Let's have a look at the denominator, the number down below. We know that we are working in tenths. Any ideas what would be the amount of tenths needed to equal 1 whole? Cast your minds back. Hopefully, I think I might have heard someone say, yes, Miss Saulo, 10 tenths will be equivalent to 1 whole. So this is what we can see here. Layla has, in fact, she's regrouped all of her counters, and although she started off with 12 tenths counters, she's regrouped to make 10 tenths, and we know that when you regroup it, that then becomes 1 whole. And what has she got left over in her tenths column? Let me just put that up at the top so we're very clear, because that's now ones. Hopefully you'll be able to see that Layla has created 1 whole and also 2 tenths are left over. So we've just figured out that 12 tenths is in fact 10 tenths and 2 tenths, and we'd be able to write that as a decimal as 1.2. Let's have a go at some guided practice so we're feeling a little bit more clearer with things. So if you have a look at question 1 at the top, you can see here that it's saying write each number as a decimal. use ones counters and tenths counters to help you. Now my first top tip to remember is this question up here on the top right. How many tenths make one whole? We've just had a look at that in the previous slide, and I'm hoping that you'll be able to remember that 10 tenths is equal to one whole. So the number that we have to be working on is 15 tenths. How am I going to first of all draw that in counters, and how am I going to write that number as a decimal? Now some of you might look at this and you might think, right, I might just partition it. I know that that 1 actually represents 10 tenths, and then I'm going to have 5 tenths left over. And I've kind of drawn it already down here for you. Instead of drawing out 15 of the tenths counters like Layla did in the last question, you would be able to regroup, and you'd be able to see that in fact 15 tenths can be broken down into 1, and then let's check and see, yep, 5 tenths. How do you think I would write that as a decimal? Because remember, that's the part of the question we can't forget. How would I write that as a decimal? Well, we would know that we've got one of the ones, and let me just put almost my place value grid on top, and then we've got my little t for tenths, and we've got 5 tenths left over. So we'd be able to write 15 tenths as 1.5. So for questions B, C and D and for guided practice, I'd like for you to have a go at answering these yourselves. I want you to think about the method that we used when working out question A. So you might want to start off by partitioning the number that you're dealing with into tenths. So we know that 22 tenths could be partitioned into 20 and 2. Remember, how many tenths will make 1 1? After that, once you've partitioned and worked it out and you're feeling confident, so let me just put this here quickly. We know that 20 is going to be 2 1s. I want you then to draw all the counters that you're going to need, either using a ones or tenths counters, just like the ones we did before, and then at the end you're going to have to write that number as a decimal. Please show your workings out, and remember to pause the video, and the next slide will be going through the answers. Best of luck, guys. Okay guys, let's have a look at the answers for our practice questions B, C and D. So question 1, we worked out that 22 tenths can be partitioned into 20 and 2. We also know that 10 tenths is equal to one of the ones counters. So I'm just going to write that on top there. Again, sorry, it's a bit wiggly and it's hard to draw. So we have got, first of all, we know we've got 20. And we can see that that would give us 2 of the ones counters, and then we've got 2 tenths left over. That would give us therefore 2 of the tenths counters. Now how are we going to write that as a decimal number? Well, we know we've got 2 wholes, and then I'm going to put my decimal point, and because we've got 2 tenths, that would just give us a number 2. So 22 tenths is also equal to writing 2.2. Now question C. 30 tenths, we therefore know that that would give us 3 lots of 10, so we can then just draw 3 of the ones counters. Now how would I write that as a decimal? Now think about that. 3, yep, okay, but remember we're thinking about a decimal, so we have to have a decimal point. Are there any tenths there? No, we can't just leave it empty like that. You have to put a 0. We also call this a placeholder. I think some of you might have remembered I used to draw the 0 and it had like mighty arms almost holding up that column. That placeholder has to be there. Now, last but not least, question D, we've got 65 tenths. We can partition that to 60 and then 5. We then know, because 10 tenths equals one of the ones counters, that you're going to require 6 of the ones counters and then 5 of the tenths counters. How am I going to write that as a decimal number? Well, we can see we've got 6 wholes, as in whole one counters, and then we've got 5 of the tenths counters. So that last number would be 6.5. Hopefully you found that quite straightforward. Well done, guys. Now, question 2 of guided practice is a little bit trickier because we are using a number line. Now, let's have a look at the first question. It says, what is the decimal represented by each letter? Now, you should be able to see that we've got A, B, C, and D. You're going to have to count along the number line. Let me just draw like a little A there. How are we going to answer this? So we know that at this point we've got 0 and then 0.5. What do you think the decimal represented here at A on the number line is going to be? Any ideas? Well, we can count along and we know if we're starting from 0, it's going to be 0.1, 0.2. Now what I would like for you to do now is I'd like for you to pause the video and I'd like for you to work out B, C and D independently, and once you've completed that you can go on to the next slide where the answers will be revealed. Best of luck guys, well done. Okay guys, so here we have the answers to question 2 of guided practice. Hopefully that went well for you and you're feeling super confident. So we worked out just on the previous slide actually that finding this letter A represented on the number line would in fact be 1.2, and we started from 0 and counted along. We then got to B. Now I'm hoping some of you might have even started from 0.5 and counted on to 0.6, 7, then 8. Then we got to C. We've now seen on the number line that at this point we've now passed over into the ones portion of the number line, and if we've got 1 here then we're going to be counting on 1.1, 1.2, 1.3 and then 1.4. We know here that this is 1.5, so then D is going to be 1.6. So now that you've conquered this lesson, I'd like for you to go to your textbooks, sorry, your workbook should I say, and can you please turn to pages 5 and 6. Don't forget the date, remember, and please complete the work for today. If you don't have your workbooks at home, they've also been attached to today's PDF. And best of luck everyone. Hope that lesson has made you feel ready and raring to go.